Gillette Stadium's neighbors are not happy. This was absolute gridlock in Foxborough yesterday.
Imagine you live in Foxborough, Massachusetts, a town with only 18,600 people. The town manager is currently staring at a $7.8 million security bill that nobody has paid for, which is almost half of what the entire town spends on public safety in a year. Things have gotten so bad that he's threatening to pull FIFA's hosting license entirely. While this small town struggles to survive, FIFA is expecting to rake in between $11 and $13 billion from this tournament. The math just doesn't add up because while FIFA is seeing green, these cities are seeing nothing but red. The truth is that this $14 billion World Cup isn't some massive payday for American cities, but instead it's a giant bill they didn't bother to read before signing. And here is the part that should really get under your skin. There is one specific clause in the contract that turned a projected $30 million revenue stream into a desperate hunt for local mechanics and dry cleaners just to break even. I am going to show you exactly what that clause says, so make sure you stick around. We need to start with what these cities actually agreed to do, because this is where the whole story starts to fall apart. When a city signs a host city agreement with FIFA, they aren't entering into a fair partnership where everyone wins. They are basically signing a service contract where FIFA is the boss and the city is a worker who never gets a paycheck. The list of things these cities have to pay for is honestly staggering. They are responsible for every single police officer on the street, all the bus and train management, emergency medical teams, and they even have to provide fully furnished office space for FIFA staff. The wildest part is that the cities have to provide all of this for free. FIFA doesn't chip in a dime. They don't pay for half, and they certainly don't reimburse the local taxpayers for the trouble. On the other side of the table, FIFA keeps total control over everything that happens on match day. They take 100% of the ticket sales and 100% of the global sponsorship money, meaning the organization making billions of dollars won't even pay for the cops standing outside their own front door. You might be thinking that the cities will at least make some money back through sales tax on those expensive tickets, but that is the biggest gut punch of all. Kansas City is set to lose over $11 million in tax revenue because FIFA demanded that all ticket sales be tax exempt. This isn't just some imaginary number, because that is real money that usually goes to local schools, and now it's just gone. The contracts are also designed to protect FIFA at every turn while leaving the cities exposed to all the risk. Most cities are stuck with these terms, but Toronto actually managed to get a special addendum in early 2024 that lets them walk away if things get too expensive. Their team fought hard for that protection, but most American cities didn't get the same deal and are now stuck with the bill. This brings us right back to Foxborough, where the weight of this deal is becoming a total nightmare. A tiny town of 18,000 people is being forced to swallow millions in costs for fire and medical services, with almost no way to make that money back. They don't have a massive hotel district to tax, and they don't have the infrastructure to handle the hit. Even the $625 million that Congress promised for security hasn't actually shown up yet, and we are less than 100 days away from the start. That federal money sounds like a lot until you realize it has to be split between 11 different cities. When you do the math, each city only gets about $56 million, which barely covers the security budget for a place like Atlanta. If the ticket money is gone and the federal help is too small, you have to wonder where the revenue is actually supposed to come from. That is where the sponsorship story gets really uncomfortable, and you won't believe how it works. When FIFA first started pitching this deal to American cities, they made a very specific promise to get everyone on board. They told local leaders they could sign up to 10 local sponsors each, which sounded like a massive win for the host committees. Based on the early projections, that was supposed to bring in $25 to $30 million in new revenue for every single city. This was the money cities planned to use to pay for all those mandated costs we just talked about, like security, transport, and infrastructure. That was the pitch, but the reality turned out to be a total bait and switch. The problem started when FIFA locked down almost every major commercial category for its own global partners before the cities could even get started. Brands like Coca-Cola and Adidas, along with the rest of FIFA's top-tier partners, claimed the most valuable spots first. They took beverages, apparel, financial services, cars, and technology right off the table. By the time the local cities actually went to market to find their own sponsors, the cupboard was almost completely bare. One host committee executive didn't hold back when describing what was left, saying the only categories available were dry cleaners and mechanics. That isn't just a colorful exaggeration or a joke, because it's a direct quote about the scraps FIFA actually left open for local deals. Because of this, the 11 US host cities are now staring at a collective sponsorship shortfall of over $250 million. This wasn't just extra money or a nice bonus, as cities had already baked these specific projections into their official budgets. They planned entire programs around that revenue, hired staff, and made massive financial commitments they can't easily back out of now. So now you have a situation where cities are running an operational tab of $100 to $200 million per market, while the local revenue stream FIFA promised has basically been deleted. To make matters worse, the federal security money they were counting on doesn't even come close to covering the gap. We are already seeing the consequences of this budget pressure in places like South Florida. Officials there have already shifted $350,000 away from World Cup prep and moved it into homelessness services instead. That kind of reallocation tells you exactly how much stress these budgets are under right now. Meanwhile, Miami-Dade is looking at a $10.5 million clawback on funds it had already promised to World Cup operations just to keep things afloat. This is the core trap of the whole event, and we should be very clear about how it works. Cities budgeted for revenue that FIFA quietly wiped out through its own sponsorship rules, and then the federal government provided funding that failed to cover the difference. The math simply doesn't add up for the locals, even though FIFA's own $11 to $13 billion revenue projection is a very real number. The money is being made, but it just isn't landing in the city budgets where it's needed most. But here's the thing. Not every city is losing money on this deal. The actual picture is a bit more complicated than just a total disaster story, and that's why this is so interesting. If you follow the business of sports, let's run the CEO scorecard on 4 specific markets to see who is actually winning, who is just breaking even, and who is stuck subsidizing the entire tournament. To figure out who's actually coming out on top, we have to look at 3 specific metrics: the net fiscal impact, the lift in hotel taxes, and the long-term return on infrastructure. You can think of this like a traffic light. Green, yellow, or red applied to 4 different markets that show us how this is playing out across the country. New York and New Jersey are sitting at a yellow light right now. MetLife Stadium is hosting the final, and the total economic activity for the region is projected to top $2 billion. That is a massive amount of money moving through the local economy, but it doesn't mean everything is perfect. They are already scaling back the fan festival at Liberty State Park because the logistics and costs are just too high. Like everyone else, they are still waiting on their share of federal security funds, which means the profit isn't a sure thing yet. The prestige of hosting the biggest game in the world is real, but even big markets have to work hard to absorb these costs. Yellow Foxborough is a bright red light, and it isn't even a close call. You already heard about that $7.8 million security bill, but the real problem is that there is almost no financial upside to balance it out. There is no major hotel district right there, no massive tourism infrastructure, and no local sponsorship base big enough to move the needle. You have a town of only 18,600 people essentially underwriting a global mega event, while capturing almost none of the profit. They've even publicly threatened to withhold FIFA's license because that federal money still hasn't shown up. This is the most extreme example of a small market being used to fuel a global organization's revenue machine. Red. Kansas City is also getting a red light, which might be surprising because things look great on the surface. They have 6 matches at Arrowhead Stadium, and hotel rates are projected to spike by 364%. That is not a typo. There will be a genuine tourism boom in the city. But when you run the actual math, the picture changes quickly. The city is losing over $11 million in sales tax revenue because the tickets are tax exempt, and that money is never coming back. The full bill for security and transport still lands on the city, while the hotel price spikes mostly benefit the hotel owners rather than the municipal budget. You end up with a massive economic event happening in the streets, while the city's own balance sheet takes a hit. The tourist boom and the fiscal loss are happening at the same time, and that is the mid-market trap in its purest form. Finally, Los Angeles is a solid green light. Local impact projections are coming in at around $892 million, and they have a huge advantage because SoFi Stadium was already built for events of this size. The entertainment and tourism infrastructure is already in place, from the international flight pipelines to the massive hospitality industry and transport networks. FIFA's mandated costs are still a factor in LA, but the city's existing capacity can handle them in a way a place like Foxborough never could. Plus, everything they do for the World Cup feeds directly into their prep for the 2028 Olympics. This gives their infrastructure investment a 10-year return story instead of just a one-summer story. Green. The pattern here is pretty easy to see once you look at the data. Markets that already have the capacity and the deep visitor pipelines are the ones that come out ahead. Everyone else ends up subsidizing FIFA's record-breaking revenue. Those huge economic impact numbers you see in the news are real, but they just don't usually end up in the city budgets. That is the one detail that most of the coverage misses entirely, but it's the most important part of the story. The cities currently panicking over their budgets didn't lose because the World Cup is a bad event, but they failed because they signed massive deals without running a real net fiscal model first. If you ever find yourself in a room where a mega event bid is being discussed, you need this 3-step playbook to keep things from spiraling out of control. First, you have to run honest net fiscal projections before the bid even goes out, which means subtracting every mandated cost and applying realistic caps on what you'll actually make from sponsorships. Never trust those inflated gross impact numbers that consultants love to throw around. Second, you need to negotiate your revenue sharing and liability caps right at the start, and that means demanding written federal backstops inside the host agreement itself instead of relying on a side promise. Third, make sure you build in escape clauses and legacy triggers. Using performance-based funding releases and mandatory audits will protect the taxpayers if that promised economic boom never actually shows up in your local neighborhood. Next time a city in your area announces a bid for a massive event, go find the host city agreement and run those 3 metrics yourself to see if the math actually adds up. If you want to see how FIFA structures its entire $11 billion revenue machine from the top down, I've got that full breakdown in the next video. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.